The wind spoke in a hush that curled under doorways and slid over the hills like a ghost. Snow had fallen steady for 2 days now, muting the world to a soft hush, and Cora Maddox stood barefoot at her stove, wrapped in a wool shawl and warmed only by the flame and the rhythm of her own quiet thoughts. She stirred rabbit stew with one hand, the other absently pressed to her lower back where old bruises had faded but never truly left. Her cabin sat near the edge of Pine Hollow, a place folks passed by but rarely visited. She'd lived there 3 years now, alone. The town whispered about her, but not often to her face. They said she'd driven her husband off, that she read Indian herbs and slept with knives beneath her pillow. That was mostly true, though the knives were not for vengeance, they were for peace. She didn't expect company. The dusk had turned indigo, and frost etched itself across the window glass in delicate veins. Firelight flickered against the log walls, warm and low. She had just set a second bowl across from hers out of habit, not hope, when the knock came. Not a gentle tap, but one heavy thud. Then another. Then silence. She froze, ladle in hand, breath caught between ribs. No one came out here without cause. And no one knocked like that unless they carried urgency or menace. Her rifle was behind the door. She stepped toward it slowly, listening to the quiet beyond the threshold. Wind moaned through the trees. A drip of melting snow fell from the porch beam and landed with a pat. Then another knock. Weak this time. Not demanding. More like a plea that had forgotten how to ask. She opened the door 3 inches and saw him. An Apache warrior slumped against her frame, blood soaking the left side of his chest, dark against weathered leather. His face was fierce even in weakness, broad cheekbones, long hair tangled and windblown, jaw clenched against pain. But it was his eyes that stopped her, calm, dark, and unafraid. He didn't speak. He didn't beg. He just looked at her, like she was the last tree standing in a barren plain. Cora hesitated. She could smell the blood now, coppery and warm in the cold air. She should have called for the sheriff. She should have let him freeze. But her hands moved before her mind did. "Come in," she whispered. He stumbled forward 1 step and nearly fell. She caught him under the arm, surprised at the weight of him, the burn of fever through his coat. He didn't resist. He didn't groan. Just leaned into her like a storm-worn pine against a steady fence post. She laid him on her cot beside the fire. He didn't speak even then. His shirt was torn, the wound a jagged slash, probably from a settler's blade, maybe recent. She fetched hot water, her herbs, her needle and gut thread. As she cleaned the wound, he flinched once, but said nothing. His breath hitched when she stitched, but his eyes remained open, watching her, not with suspicion, but with a quiet acknowledgement, as if this was not the first time his life had depended on a stranger's mercy. She worked in silence. Her hands were steady. Her heart wasn't. This man could be danger, could bring death to her door by morning. Yet the air between them was still, like the breath between thunder and lightning. When the wound was closed and wrapped, she covered him with her father's old army blanket. He looked older now, not by years, but by miles. His hand rested on his chest near the bandage, fingers splayed like he was holding in more than blood. She returned to the stew, poured 2 bowls this time, set one beside him. He didn't move, didn't eat, but his eyes followed her, never sharp, never soft, just present, like he'd already memorized the room, and now was memorizing her. Finally, she asked the only question she dared. "Will someone be looking for you?" He didn't answer. Instead, after a long moment, he blinked slow and turned his head toward the fire. That was answer enough. She didn't press, didn't need to. She sat back at the table, her own food growing cold. The fire cracked once, loud as a pistol in the silence. Outside, the snow had begun again, falling light and fine, like salt shaken from heaven. She wrapped her fingers around the bowl and watched him breathe. Something in his stillness made the room feel safer than it ever had when she was alone. Not because he'd protect her, not because he was strong, but because he didn't expect anything. Not a smile, not thanks, not even belief. And in that quiet, Cora realized what she feared most wasn't him, but what the town would do when they found out. Because they would. They always did. And they didn't forgive women who made choices without their permission. She rose again, stoked the fire, then moved to bar the door, not against the man lying in her bed, but against the world that would come knocking next. Let them say what they would. Tonight, a wounded man would sleep warm. And that was enough. She sat by the hearth until her eyes grew heavy, the flicker of flame painting her face in gold and shadow. Behind her, the stranger finally closed his eyes, and the snow kept falling. By morning, the snow had stopped, but the hush remained. A thin layer of frost clung to the edges of Cora's windows, delicate as lace, and the sun rose low in gold, too timid to melt much of anything. The man on her cot hadn't moved much in the night. She'd woken more than once to the sound of his breathing, shallow but even, like the hush of wind through pine needles. She brought him warm water and a bit of bread softened in broth. He didn't speak, but he took it with a nod. His movements were slow, deliberate, like each limb had to remember its purpose. His dark eyes flicked from her to the fire, then back again, always steady. Cora had never known someone could say so much with silence. She opened the door to fetch more firewood, and that's when she saw it. Hoof prints in the snow, more than one set, headed down the ridge and back toward town. Not hers. Not his. Her mouth dried. Someone had come close enough to look. They always looked. By noon, the knock came. Polite, wrapped in the cadence of neighborly concern, but sharp underneath. It was Alma Wilkes, preacher's wife, with her ever-knitted shawl and a warm loaf of sourdough that steamed between her gloved hands. Cora stepped aside, not inviting her in, but not blocking the threshold either. "Thought you might need a little something this morning," Alma said, gaze darting over Cora's shoulder. Her smile strained at the edges. Cora took the bread. "Thank you." Alma didn't leave. "I couldn't help noticing," she trailed off, then gave a little laugh that wasn't laughter. "Tracks out back. Heavy ones. Not from your boots, I expect." Cora said nothing. Alma lowered her voice. "Someone saw him come. He looked hurt. Looked Apache." Cora nodded once. "He was hurt. Still is. You let him in?" "I wasn't raised to let a man die in the snow." Alma clucked her tongue like disappointment was a prayer. "You know how this town feels about that kind. About women living alone with men not their kin, especially ones who fought against settlers." Cora met her gaze. "He hasn't raised a hand to me." Alma sighed, more for performance than sorrow. "You'll have to make this right before tongues wag further. The men are already speaking with the sheriff. A woman can't just take in a savage and expect the world to spin easy the next day." Cora's hands tightened on the loaf. Then let the world turn uneasy. That night, the cabin was quiet but tight with tension. The man hadn't asked what was said, but he watched her closer now, like he sensed a storm brewing just beyond her walls. She offered him more broth. He accepted, always with that soft nod. Then he surprised her. "Cora," he said. Her name in his voice felt different. Not taken, given, measured. She looked up. "My name is John." She let it settle between them like warm ash. "John," she echoed. He nodded, eyes flicking toward the dark beyond the window. "They'll come. I know. You don't have to keep me. I didn't keep you. I kept you alive. There's a difference." The smallest ghost of a smile touched his lips. But he was right. They came the next morning. 3 riders. The sheriff among them. He dismounted like he meant to step on the truth and grind it into the dirt. "Miss Maddox," he said, touching his hat. "Mornin'." Cora stood on her porch, arms folded beneath her shawl. John was inside, quiet as breath. The sheriff cleared his throat. "We had a town meeting last night. Your guest is of concern. Men are uneasy. There's talk that the situation might be improper." Cora didn't blink. "He's wounded. He hasn't hurt a soul. Doesn't matter much to them. He's Apache. You're alone. Folks assume." She stared at him. "Let them assume." He glanced back at the other 2 riders, who looked anywhere but her eyes. "We're asking for clarity," the sheriff said. "If you're not his hostage and he's not your kin, then the only righteous path would be to wed him." else folks'll say things, hard things, could make life here difficult. She laughed, dry as wind-blown dust. So it's marriage or exile? More like marriage or peace, he said. We ain't looking to hurt no one, but it would settle things if you made your arrangement clear, Apache or not. He left her with a paper notice. No legal authority, just a town vote signed by 6 names, none of them women. That evening, Cora told John what they'd said. He didn't flinch, just stirred the stew, handed her a bowl. You are not theirs to arrange, he said. She almost wept then, not from fear, but because no one had ever said it so plainly. That night, she had a dream. Her house empty again, wind howling through the cracks, a fire burned out. She was alone and untouched, and utterly cold. She woke before dawn and found John sitting at the edge of the porch, wrapped in his blanket, watching the horizon lighten. I've been alone a long time, she said softly, stepping beside him. He nodded. I know that kind of silence. They didn't speak of the choice. Not yet. But they both knew it hung in the air like smoke, what kind of woman she'd be tomorrow, what kind of man the town would force him to become. Still, she brought him bread, and he took it. Still, he stood when she entered, and she touched his shoulder in thanks. Still, the snow melted just a little under the porch, as if spring hadn't entirely given up. The town would come again. That much was certain. But for tonight, kindness lived between them, and it was enough to hold the world at bay. The first sign was a turnip torn clean from the earth. Not plucked, not harvested, ripped. Cora stared at it in her hand, the white flesh smeared with mud and boot heel. She found another, crushed under heel, the mark deliberate. By the time she discovered the third, a crude knife driven into the fence post beside her garden bed, her hands had gone still. No wind blew. The clouds hung low and woolen over Pine Hollow, and in that quiet hour before breakfast, someone had spoken with violence where their mouths had failed. She pulled the knife free and held a moment. The handle was old pine, worn smooth by many hands. It wasn't left behind by accident. It was meant for her, not to wound her body, but her peace. Inside, John was boiling water. He had begun helping around the cabin, silent tasks taken without request. She had not asked for help. But when she brought in the chopped wood yesterday and found a fresh stack already resting near the hearth, her throat had caught. He had simply nodded when she looked at him. Now, she placed the knife down on the table between them. They were here again, she said. His eyes moved from the knife to her, then back. She sat, fingers brushing a crack in the tabletop. They don't want me afraid. They want me obedient. John stirred the pot once. In my language, we have a word for this. Dishine, not enemy, not warrior. It means those who push because they cannot hold. Cora didn't reply right away. She watched the steam rise from the pot and listened to the silence settle around them like an old blanket. In the corners of the room, dust danced in the slanted light. It was a quiet house, but not empty anymore. Later that day, she found him in the garden, replanting what could be salvaged. His hands were careful, thumbs pressing each seedling gently into the earth like an offering. He didn't ask permission. He didn't speak while he worked. But the rows were straight, and her tools were cleaned when he was done. That night, he set the table for 2. They ate without hurry. She had begun to grow used to his presence, not the way one grows used to furniture, but like one learns the sound of a creak in spring or the weight of a coat worn in winter. Necessary, quiet, alive. When he smiled for the first time, it was over a crooked biscuit. She had tried a new recipe and burned the bottoms. He'd taken one, flipped it over, examined the char, and then there it was. The smile came slow, hesitant, like a dawn unsure of the sky. Cora laughed, too surprised to hold it back. A small, bright sound that startled even her. She hadn't laughed in a year. Not really. John looked at her then, not just with his eyes, but as if he could see through time. She felt it like the heat from a hearth, warming places in her that had long gone cold. "You have a good laugh," he said. "I'd forgotten I had one." They lingered after supper. She didn't clear the plates right away. He didn't rise to go outside. The stillness stretched between them like a bridge, and neither of them moved to end it. She told him, slowly, about the child she once carried, how it had come too early, how the town healer hadn't arrived in time, how no one had come. His voice was quiet. My mother lost 3, but she always said each one was born into the stars instead of the soil, that they watched the fires from above. Cora closed her eyes. That's kinder than what the preacher said. He's not the only one with truth. The next morning, someone spat near her feet as she walked past the trading post. No words, just contempt heavy in the air. She kept her chin up, hands steady on her basket. They feared her now, not for what she'd done, but for what she hadn't. She hadn't apologized. She hadn't yielded. She hadn't run. Back home, she found a wildflower tucked beneath her door latch. It wasn't one she grew. She brought it inside, set it in a cup, and said nothing. By supper, she offered John honey with his bread. He nodded once, pleased. They talked then about things not made of pain, about the shape of clouds, the call of hawks, how the moon had looked like a broken coin last night. She asked him what he missed most from his people. He said simply, laughter without fear. She understood more than she said. That night, she brought her journal to the table and, by lantern light, wrote a single name for him. Not the one he'd given her, but the one her heart had started using. Safe to stay. She didn't tell him. Not yet. But she left the journal open on the shelf by her bed. The wind picked up outside. A weather shift coming. Maybe another storm. But inside, the cabin was warm. They shared one last glance before sleep. It was not a promise. Not yet. But it was an understanding. The world was sharpening its knives. But here, in this small house between the pines, they were beginning to blunt the edge. The letter came folded in perfect thirds, smelling faintly of pipe smoke and starch. Cora found it tucked beneath a stone on her porch, the parchment stiff with cold. She read it standing up, boots half-laced, the wind tugging at her shawl. It was not a threat. That would have been simpler. It was a proposal, formal, written in tidy lines with too many therefores and considerations. At the bottom was the name Elijah Cormack, a merchant widow twice her age, with hands like sausage and breath that carried vinegar. He was offering her respectability, a swift marriage, a reset. The town, he wrote, would welcome her back. We've all had our lapses of judgment, Cora, but it's not too late to correct the course of your name. She folded the letter without finishing it. Her hands were shaking, not from cold, but from the peculiar fury of being pitted by a man who'd never once looked her in the eye unless he thought she might curtsy. Inside, John was working at the stove. He stirred oatmeal with the same steady motion he used to mend her fence or line the garden rows with ash to keep the worms away. He had taken to the rhythm of her house like he'd always lived there. Quiet, consistent, present. She handed him the letter without speaking. He read it slowly. The only sign of reaction, a slight tightening of his jaw. They offer you a cage, he said. With a window, she added, half a laugh caught in her throat. They say if I marry him, the town will forget everything. They won't forget, John said. They'll just stop saying it loud. She nodded. The forgetting isn't for me. It's for them. That night, the knock at the door wasn't gentle. Cora opened it to find Sheriff Holler and 2 more men, none of them bothering with the courtesy of hats removed or eyes lowered. Miss Maddox, the sheriff began, voice coated in syrup. We're here in goodwill. Ain't looking to pressure no one. But there's still unease in town. Still, she asked. After all this quiet? He ignored that. Elijah Cormack has made you an offer. A generous one. We think it would do much to ease tensions. Right now the vote's split. Some folks want your Apache sent out. Some want harsher. But if you married a local, well, people would stop seeing you as a problem. Cora stepped out onto the porch. Her boots echoed on the old boards. So, she said soft and slow, you're telling me I can either marry a man I don't know, or you'll run the man I chose out with pitchforks? We're not saying that exactly. But you're standing on my porch with guns. The sheriff's face darkened. You think this is about him? It's about keeping this town from coming apart. We already got folks talking about burning that cabin down if something don't give. He glanced over her shoulder. If you care about that man, you'll get rid of him. She closed the door. By nightfall, the barn burned. The glow came sudden and wrong, casting flickering gold against the window panes. Cora smelled smoke before she saw it, sharp, oily, urgent. She and John burst from the cabin just as the flames swallowed the hayloft, roaring like a wild thing long kept in. He rushed toward it, shovel in hand, but it was too late. The blaze had eaten too much. They watched together as the roof caved in, ash spiraling into the stars like prayer gone sideways. She was shaking, hands clenched at her sides, breath too fast to calm. John stood beside her, still and silent, the fire painting his skin in amber and shadow. "I built that barn myself," she whispered. He didn't answer, didn't need to. When the flames settled to embers, he turned to her and said, "They want you to feel small. Not because you are, because you made them feel it once." The wind picked up. Her eyes stung, not from smoke. Later, she found him by the gate, hammering up a row of new posts, reinforcing what hadn't yet burned. His movements were precise, not angry, steady. Cora came beside him and laid her hand on the fence. "They think if I marry you, I lose everything," she said. John paused, looked at her. "Do you?" She met his gaze. "No." He returned to hammering. When he finished, they sat together on the porch. The stars were sharp tonight, clear and scattered like spilled salt across black velvet. The last of the smoke curled low around the trees. She told him, finally, what the sheriff had said. Every word, even the threat. He was quiet for a long time. Then, "Where I come from, marriage is not a trap. It is a promise. Not made in fear, but in recognition." Cora looked down at her hands. The skin was worn, her knuckles scraped from hauling buckets and lifting ruined beams. She had once thought love would feel like rescue. It didn't. This felt like something else, like reaching the other side of a storm to find someone still standing beside you, not untouched, but unflinching. She reached for his hand. "I don't need a preacher to tell me what we are," she said, "but I'll stand with you, before them, however they want it said." He looked at her with something like awe, not because she was saving him, because she wasn't afraid to choose him. The fire might have taken her barn, but it hadn't touched her resolve. And tomorrow they would face the town, together. Morning came bruised in color, gray and rose, as though the sky itself sensed what was coming. A stillness hung over Pine Hollow, too quiet to be peaceful. Even the sparrows in the chimney didn't stir. Cora stood at the stove, hands busy, though her thoughts galloped. Her hair was braided low, tied with a bit of leather string. She wore the blue wool skirt she'd kept pressed for years and never once had cause to wear. The one her mother stitched before she passed, saying, "Every woman should have a skirt she feels strong in." John sat at the table, sharpening the same knife he'd used to cut fence wire and trim apple bark. He wasn't dressed for war, just clean, as if decency itself might defy what was coming. His face was unreadable, but his presence filled the cabin like a stone hearth, weighty, grounding, and necessary. They ate without speaking, though there was no silence between them, only a quiet readiness. Love doesn't always bloom in fields of lilies. Sometimes it takes root in burnt soil and survives on nothing but truth. Cora stood first. "They'll come soon." John rose and nodded once. He opened the door. The snow had mostly melted, leaving the earth soft and splotched with spring. Mud clung to the road in wide sweeps, and the trees stood like sentinels beyond the ridge. And there, at the edge of their land, came the riders. 6, maybe more, guns across saddles. One held a rope already knotted at the end. Sheriff Holler led them, his face set in hard lines, though something about his posture betrayed discomfort. He wasn't here to kill, but he was here to threaten, and threats wear many masks. Cora and John stepped onto the porch together. She did not stand behind him. The men stopped 10 paces away. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the wind held its breath. Then the sheriff dismounted and cleared his throat. "Miss Maddox, we hoped you'd reconsider." I have, she replied, her voice clear, stronger than the wind. We're not leaving. He looked at John. We didn't come to debate. Folks are nervous. If you won't marry him, then he needs to go. There's fear rising in town, and fear makes fools out of good men. I am marrying him, she said. Not because you told me to. Because you told me not to. Murmurs rippled behind the sheriff. One man shifted his grip on his rifle. Another coughed into the silence. Cora, the sheriff said more gently, this ain't about you. It's about what he represents. We lost good men to Apache raids. There's scars in this town. And I carry mine alone, she said, stepping forward. You think your pain earns you righteousness? I've buried a child, survived a husband's fists, and rebuilt a life from nothing but quiet. I gave kindness to a bleeding man, and now you want to hang him because he made your silence uncomfortable. No one answered. John looked at them, not with anger, but with steadiness, as though daring them to see him not as a ghost or threat, but a man. I came in peace, he said, and stayed because I was treated as human. The sheriff looked back at his men, unsure now. Fear is loud, but shame is quieter and heavier. Then, from the edge of the crowd, a boy broke free. Small, maybe 8. Shoes too big. He ran to Cora and held up a worn cloth satchel. My ma said you saved me last winter. With them herbs. When I was coughing bad. Cora knelt, brushing hair from his eyes. I remember. He looked at John. He helped with our barn roof, too. Pa didn't know, but I seen it. He fixed it quiet. Cora stood, heart pounding. The sheriff shifted. You brought rifles, she said, voice rising. For a man who mended fences and planted roots. You call yourselves settlers, but you fear anyone who does what you won't. Stay and make peace. A long, hollow silence followed. Then one man, Jacob Barlow, who'd lost a brother in a skirmish years ago, lowered his rifle. I won't raise my gun against a man who's done no harm. Another followed, and another. The preacher rode forward, scowling. You think God smiles on this? This filth? This sin? Cora turned, the wind lifting her braid. I think God sent a man to my door who never raised his hand, never raised his voice, and never once lied to me. That's more than I can say of any man who's stepped into my life from that town. The preacher's lip curled, but he turned his horse. No more words. The crowd began to break apart, slowly, shamefully, and the sheriff at last tipped his hat, low not in respect, but in resignation. I hope you know what you're doing. I do, she said. For once I truly do. By noon, they were gone. Cora and John stood on the porch long after the last hoofbeat faded. She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. Guess we'll have to rebuild the barn. He looked at her and, for the first time, laughed. Not loud, but full. I've built stronger things, he said. She smiled, eyes glinting. So have I. Above them, the sky began to clear, the bruises of morning giving way to light. In the hush of spring's return, the land held its breath again, but this time, not in fear. This time, it was hope.